who will introduce tonight's speaker.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Megan. When my stepfather, Art Sherman, told me well over a year ago that he wanted to turn his focus to the future of work and the future of transformative technology, with the leading focus being the driverless car, I was not surprised. Art has always been ahead of the curve. He is and was a rocket scientist for real. In fact, in 1964, during the height of the space race to the moon between the US and Russia, Art actually testified before Congress, before the House Subcommittee on Science and Astronautics on manned space flight as the then head of the Advanced Rocket Engineering Division at Reaction Motors. He is an expert in liquid propulsion. So I find it particularly ironic that nearly 60 years later, he is among those spearheading a conference on unmanned ground travel. As I heard about this wonderful course, I immediately had one book in mind, Autonomy by Larry Burns, whose editor, Denise Oswald, has an office very close to mine back when we used to go to the office. I ordered the book and sent it off to Art, and after reading it, he was so eager to move ahead to the next step, which was landing, pardon the pun, Larry Burns for this evening's event. Here's why there was so much enthusiasm. While Art had worked for Reaction Motors, Larry Burns worked for General Motors and oversaw GM's advanced technology and innovation programs. At the University of Michigan, he was an esteemed engineering professor, and at Columbia University, just about 2 miles north from where I'm sitting here in New York City, he spearheaded the program on sustainable mobility. Burns was also an advisor of the Google self-driving car project, now called Waymo, and is a member of the US National Academy of Engineering. His book, Autonomy, debuted in 2018 to rave reviews, including this one from Forbes. Quote, with his access to so many players, including Google founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin, Burns does a masterful job weaving the various strands of his story together. And a juicy story it is, filled with an insider's firsthand experiences and observations. Skeptics, beware. You'll be a lot less skeptical about the imminence of self-driving technology after reading this book. What we will be learning about tonight is the trajectory from the age of automobiles to the age of automobility. It's a fascinating journey. And tonight, the interview with Larry Burns after he does his slideshow presentation will be driven, so to speak, by Patrick Larkin, a Pittsfield native and the director of the Innovation Institute at the Massachusetts Technology Collaborative, a Boston-based state economic development agency, which enhances the state's tech and innovation economy through harnessing talent, through insights, investments, and partnerships. Patrick himself has a storied career from working in DC in the 1980s for the late Congressman Silvio Conti, then the ranking member of the House Appropriations Committee during a time when a spirit of bipartisanship to improve our lives was the rule rather than the exception which we have today. He also nearly won his own congressional seat in the 1990s and has really been actively involved in initiatives around fintech, AI, blockchain, and more in his role at the Innovation Institute. Once Pat and Larry finish their conversation, I'll moderate a Q&A by all of you, and I encourage you to please type your questions right there into the chat, and I will be monitoring the questions throughout. So please submit those, and thank you so much to Larry and Pat for this wonderful big Berkshire's kickoff. NFL, eat your heart out.
Fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Did that come through okay for everyone?
Not yet.
Okay, I believe I've shared.
So it's share screen, pick out what you're sharing, and then hit share again. It's the 1, 2, 3.
Okay, let me go back again. Said host disabled attendee share screening. I wonder if it's on your end. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Here, try it. I just shifted something, so it should work now.
Okay, so share screen. Click on what I'm sharing.
There it
And
is.
okay, and then go to slideshow. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay, that's fantastic. Well, thank you everybody for joining this evening. And thank you very much, Lisa, for the introduction, and Megan and Pat for supporting this, and very much to Art Sherman for providing the vision and reaching out to me to make tonight possible. This is the cover of the book, Autonomy. And, you know, there's a famous baseball player named Yogi Berra. And when he retired from baseball, the journalists asked him what was he going to do in retirement. And he said he was going to finish his book. And they said, oh, you're writing a book? And he said, no, I'm reading a book. And at one point in time in my life, I felt maybe that's what I was going to do, is read a book. But in fact, I decided to write Autonomy because I felt an enormous transformation in how people and goods are moving around in our world was right within our grasp. It was going to have enormous societal benefits, and it was going to offer exciting business opportunities. It was going to enable a lot more people to move around. And I just felt that a story needed to be told to reach out, not to professionals who read technical journals, but really to reach out to the parents of high school kids who may be interested in science and technology and engineering and math careers. And it would be a book that they would find captivating, where the characters were real engineers doing exciting stuff out in the desert, like rolling big cars over as they try to develop autonomous vehicles. So we embarked on this. Denise Oswald, who was my publisher, read the first draft, and my co-author, Christopher Shulgin, was extraordinarily helpful. But Denise observed that we were kind of stuck between an idea book and a narrative book. And she felt that if we believed we had really exciting characters, she strongly encouraged us to do the narrative. We also had the title, The Race to Build the Driverless Car, and Denise suggested that maybe it was a quest, and that was just extraordinary advice, both on the narrative and on the title. And I'm very much indebted to the great job she did at HarperCollins. Really worked out well. So this next person is Rick Wagner. And many of you may have heard that name before. He was a chairman and CEO of General Motors when we went bankrupt in 2009. Rick became my direct boss in 1995, and I worked directly for him for that 14-year period. In 1998, he asked me to head up GM Research and Development, which was just the perfect job for me. I was head of planning for GM at the time, and he said he also wanted me to continue to head his planning. But when he asked me in 1998 to take this job, he also asked me a very, very interesting question. He said, Larry, if we were going to invent the automobile today, rather than 100 years ago, given the technology that exists today and the issues that we know we face with our industry, what would we do differently? And I'll tell you, that was a really liberating question. And it really allowed me to focus on transforming transportation, not just evolving it. And I spent the rest of my career pursuing that passion. The response to Rick's question was shared at the 2002 North American International Auto Show. That's the Detroit Auto Show. The GM team felt that the future of transportation was going to be electric drive. We had the motors in the wheels. We created this platform. We named it a skateboard chassis. And the idea was for these bodies to dock onto that chassis, much like a laptop computer at that time frame was docking onto a docking station. And it really, really was met with an exciting response. One of the challenges we had, though, when we came up with this concept car is we didn't know what to call it. And I was bemoaning this fact to my kids, my daughters. I have two daughters today. They're 32 and 29, but they were much younger than obviously. And my older daughter, who was 12 at the time, said, Dad, what is this car about? And I said, it's about, automobiles and freedom. And she said, did you look in the thesaurus under the word freedom? And obviously I hadn't, being an engineer. And so she quickly grabbed the thesaurus, and the first word that popped up was autonomy, which was just absolutely the perfect word. And we showed this in concept under the name Autonomy to the media from around the world in Detroit in January of 2002. And just real great positive coverage about the idea. What we didn't know at the time is that this skateboard chassis would ultimately be the idea underlying most of today's modern electric vehicles, including what Tesla does. I'm going to help you understand why this is such an important transformation for the automobile, especially when you marry it up with autonomous vehicles. This concept of autonomy became my passion then in my encore career. I left GM in 2009 when we went bankrupt. I didn't think I would ever get another job. Had this golden or this scarlet B on my chest for bankrupt executive, and it turns out there was a lot of interest. And I've had a chance to work with a lot of great companies since then. But this word autonomy really does capture me. You know, it means freedom, it means independence, it means self-rule and self-determination. And I just find those words so powerful and so important. And in fact, the word autonomy really is equivalent to the word of automobiles when you think about transportation. And why is that? Well, first of all, automobiles let us go almost everywhere whenever the need arises under a wide range of conditions. This is what I call accessibility. And the accessibility that you have with an automobile is truly vast. And as a result, I don't think it's surprising that 80% of US vehicles are personally owned, 85% of US personal travel is by automobile, and 88% of US households own a vehicle. If you have your own car and it's parked outside, you simply jump in it and go. You don't have to resolve a transportation problem every time you want to go somewhere. And so for those of you who oftentimes wonder, why is the car so prevalent? I think it really is rooted in this accessibility or in the autonomy that the car provides. What I want to do now is sort of go back in time and talk about a couple of my classmates, I think. Carl Benz on the left and Henry Ford on the right. Benz is credited with patenting the first gasoline-powered automobile in 1886, which was a remarkable invention. And then Ford is credited in the early 1900s with popularizing this machine. And they've taken transportation from horses to horsepower and what really turned out to be a century-long age of the automobile. And it is interesting because this really has been 134 years of evolution. And it wasn't just the car that evolved, it was the roads and the energy supply, the parking, the laws and the regulations. And over this time frame, there was a lot of improvement. Vehicles became more affordable, they became more useful, more comfortable, they became safer, cleaner, and more efficient. And it ended up, at least today, there's over 1.2 billion cars and trucks on the planet. Now, if you take that traffic and park it end to end, all of those cars end to end, and wrap it around the world, they'll go around 100 times. That's obviously huge scale, a lot of cars and trucks. And with that are a lot of serious side effects. The first one is the epidemic of roadway fatalities. There's 1.3 million people a year dying on the world's roadways, which is truly epidemic in scale. We're 95% dependent on oil for transportation. There's traffic delays and air pollution and climate change. There's land use that goes to parking, which is expensive, and there's delays associated with your trip when you have to park your car and walk to your destination. The cost of the roads and the bridges is very expensive, it's aging. And very, very importantly, there's unequal accessibility. What I mean by that is those people who are capable of driving a car and they have the financial means of owning and operating one, they have access to this vast freedom. But those who maybe are too young to drive or feeling like they can't drive because they're too old or they're disabled or they don't have the financial resources to do it, they really do not have anywhere near the same accessibility, and that's a serious concern. The thing I find most fascinating about the age of automobiles, though, is the basic car today has the same DNA as the car Benz invented and the car Ford popularized. Mechanically driven with a combustion engine, oil-based fuel, and then controlled by a human. You think of all the other devices that we use in our everyday life, over the last 100 years, they've transformed dramatically. Think about like the telephone or the television or the computer. Major, major fundamental changes in how these products are designed and manufactured and the value that they bring. But the car truly has simply evolved. It's evolved to become better, but it's been evolutionary. That is until this darkest period of the auto industry. And for those of you who remember, the Great Recession started in the 2007 timeframe, and it ran through about 2012. That's when GM went bankrupt in 2009, as did Chrysler. Several suppliers were extremely challenged financially. And it's interesting to me that the seeds of the first true transformation in the DNA of the automobile transportation were planted during this darkest period. And even more interesting, they were from players outside the auto industry, not the typical auto companies. So the first two images, the one on the left, is the vehicle that GM entered in a race called the DARPA Urban Challenge. And that's what the first couple of chapters of the book, Autonomy, get into. It tells you this story of these races that the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, sponsored. The first one was through the desert. They put $1 million prize out there and asked anyone who could drive across this desert in California would win the prize. And the first vehicles only went 7 miles. It didn't work. Then later on, they did one for a $2 million prize in an urban setting in Victorville, California. And that's the vehicle Boss, which GM sponsored Carnegie Mellon University. And that was in the fall of 2007, and we won that race. And you would think auto companies would have jumped up at that time and said, hey, we're going to do this. And they didn't. They thought it was a bunch of kids playing in sandboxes. But two people from outside the auto industry, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, felt quite differently. And they created Google self-driving cars in 2009 and went for it. And that subsequently has led to the creation of Waymo and dramatic progress on autonomous vehicles. We'll get into that a bit more in a minute. But it was very, very interesting. I really credit Larry and Sergey with saving tens of millions of lives, because I think they pulled this agenda ahead at least a decade by committing to Google self-driving cars and pulling everybody else along. And with 1.2 million people a year dying on the world's roadways, you can begin to see the significance of that. Also in the same time frame, the Tesla Roadster followed by the Model S came to be. And I think we all realize that today Tesla is worth more than Toyota, Volkswagen, and GM combined. And then finally, in this same time frame, Uber and Lyft emerged, where their business model wasn't selling cars, it was selling transportation as a service. So it is very fascinating that not only did we have technologists from outside the industry plant the seeds of transformation, these were people who deeply understood the potential of the digital economy and deeply believed in what I call design innovation, and innovation focused on improving the total experience of customers. And this is really how this story of autonomy came to be. When you take autonomous vehicles and combine them with electric vehicles and put them to use in a transportation service business rather than a vehicle as a product business, you have the age of automobility. And that is going to transform how people and goods move around and how they interact. And importantly, it's going to give us better transportation experiences at lower cost. It has attractive business opportunities associated with it and profound favorable societal impact. So I want to get into these 4 areas a little bit more. The first quiz for tonight is for you to be honest with yourself. And I can't see you raising your hand, but I've asked this to many audiences over the years as I've made speeches. How many of you really enjoy shopping for a car? It's Saturday morning, you've had a busy week, you know you need to go out and get a new car, and you go, yippee, I get to go visit that dealer. And once you pick out your car, how many like having to go through financing it and insuring it? What about buying and pumping gasoline? Your car's an 8 full and you go, yippee, I get to pull off the road, pull into a station, grab that dirty gasoline pump handle, get some gas on my shoes. How many of you like doing that? How about getting your car washed or maintaining your car? What about looking for a place to park, especially in an area that you've never been to before? How many of you like driving? Now, when I ask audiences that question, a lot of hands go up, but when I say, how about driving in traffic or sitting in traffic, the hands go down. The point that I'm making is that for over a century, the auto industry has assumed that we as consumers are willing to put up with these negative experiences and pay $35,000, which is the median price of a new car, and then leave our new car parked 90 to 95% of the time. So if you wonder why is this such a compelling opportunity, it's grounded in this design innovation, get rid of these negatives. And that's what the age of automobility does for us. We're talking about a vehicle that you could have dispatch control over, or maybe it's a shared vehicle within your community. You hit an app, it shows up at your door, you get in the vehicle, you don't have to drive it, you use your time as you please, you're dropped off precisely at your destination, you don't have to look for parking, you don't have to buy gas, you have to maintain your car or any of that. And it dramatically transforms the experience. It's safer, more secure, more robust, more timely, reliable, efficient, productive. It's seamless, enjoyable, affordable, responsive, convenient, personalized, and spontaneous. That's what we're going to be able to have with our age of automobility. And it's not just a better experience, it's at a dramatically lower consumer cost. Lisa mentioned that I spent time at Columbia University leading the program for sustainable mobility. A guy there named Jeff Sachs was head of the Earth Institute, and he asked me to come there to lead this program. And Jeff and I were very interested in what is this potential of driverless, shared, and tailor designed vehicles versus today's personally owned, human driven, and conventionally designed vehicles. The bar on the left says we pay 65 cents a mile out of our pocket to own and operate a car. That's AAA type data that they publish every year. In addition to that, it's your time value. And if you value your time at median wage, it turns out that's another 85 cents a mile when you're driving your car. And Jeff and I and another colleague of mine, Bill Jordan, modeled a whole bunch of different cities. We modeled Ann Arbor, we modeled Austin, Texas, Columbus, Ohio, Manhattan, Salt Lake City, Rochester, New York, Palm Beach County, Florida, all of those places. And over again, we became convinced that if you had a tailor-designed fleet of two-person electric vehicles that were driverless, that you needed about 15% of the number of cars in those cities to provide the same transportation supply as those cars provided. And you could reduce the cost to 20 cents a mile. That's a big deal because Americans drive 3 trillion miles a year, and that means we could be redistributing $4 trillion per year among US consumers, workers, and companies as this transformation plays out. The age of automobiles focused on designing and engineering and selling vehicles, gasoline, insurance, car financing, maintenance, and parking. The age of automobility sells miles, trips, experiences, and accessibility. Now let's take this opportunity that I talked about, that $1.50 down to 20, and let's say in that journey you can make 10 cents a mile profit. So you're not going to keep the entire $1.30 profit, you're going to keep 10 cents of that. And your vehicle lasts 300,000 miles. That's what hybrid taxi cabs do in Manhattan. That's a $30,000 profit per vehicle. Today in the auto industry, the net incomes of the new vehicles from different manufacturers range from $1,000 to $5,000. So this is a really, really compelling business opportunity compared to what car makers have faced in the past. Let's look at it a little bit differently. Let's take those 3 trillion miles, and let's say my business sells 10% of those miles. We make that 10 cents. That's 30 billion a year profit. When you compare that to the top 10 profit companies from 2019. Berkshire Hathaway obviously is an outlier there at 81 billion, but look at all of the major companies, Microsoft, JP Morgan, Alphabet, Bank of America, all in that 30 billion range. So this is a really compelling business opportunity. But maybe most importantly, it has profound societal impacts. First of all, it's going to eliminate roadway fatalities. I have been told in the past, we can't go too fast with this. We can't let technology get in front of safety. I see it differently. I think the biggest risk here is not realizing the safety benefits of autonomous vehicles as soon as we can. Why do I say that? The traffic safety experts have convinced me that 90% of the crashes will be eliminated by autonomous cars. So you take 90% of that 1.3 million fatalities a year worldwide, and divide it by 365 days, that's 3,000 lives. If we can realize the full safety potential of this technology one day sooner, we save 3,000 lives. Next, we can reduce transportation oil demand. I'm sure some of you have been reading the recession that the oil industry is in and how low the price of oil has dropped. And some of that has to do with macroeconomics and geopolitics and other things, but very, very importantly, I think there's going to be a fundamental shift dramatically away from the demand for oil and transportation. We're going to enhance accessibility, especially for people who currently don't own a car or can't drive a car. We're going to mitigate climate change and air pollution. We're going to repurpose a lot of this land for parking and parking structures. We're going to increase roadway throughput. And most importantly, we're going to provide a lot more autonomy for a lot more people. And this isn't just about moving people around, it's people and goods. It's not about just Uber without a driver. If you prefer to have your own vehicle, you can lease a vehicle for your own exclusive use. You dispatch it whenever you need it, and you can have it be autonomous and have that experience, or you can have shared use like Uber without a driver. This is about long haul and local goods movement. It's very importantly, when you ask Americans where they live, 26% say in the city, 53% in the suburbs. So this is about suburban travel, not just city travel. It's about rural travel as well. And it's going to change parking and energy and maintenance and depots and operations dramatically. Now let's look at a couple of these vehicles so you get a better feel for why the impacts are so profound. First, you can tailor design the vehicle for the types of trips we make. 80% of the trips in the US are 1 and 2 person, and the average speeds in cities are 20 to 30 miles an hour, and 70% of our trips are less than 8 miles. So that vehicle in the upper left corner is called ENVI, Electrically Networked Vehicle. It's one of the last projects I led at GM, and it was the vehicle that showcased the 2010 Shanghai World Expo as an autonomous electric pod, top speed 35 miles an hour. The design of these vehicles will be about compelling experiences. They'll be the ultimate riding machines, not the ultimate driving machines. They'll be optimized for cost per mile, which makes them want to be electric with longer vehicle lives and easy maintenance. Very importantly, the designers and engineers anticipate about half as many parts in these vehicles as we have today in our combustion-driven, human-driven vehicles. So very, very significant ramifications. And it also holds for goods movement. Goods movement will become safer, lower cost, faster, with higher throughput, cleaner, more diverse energy, and very importantly, highly synergistic with e-commerce. And as we all know, living through the pandemic, e-commerce has been put on steroids now in terms of how we're living our lives. And here are some examples of those. I want to pick the one on the upper corner just to dive in on a little bit more. This is Volvo's Vera concept. A few years back, I was asked by Navistar to provide some advice, and I got thinking about an over-the-road tractor, and I got thinking about all the parts on that tractor: the windshield, the doors, the seats, the steering wheel, the air conditioner. And I got convinced that the pile of parts that you take off of the over-the-road tractor will cost more than the parts you had to make it autonomous. And lo and behold, Volvo comes up with this concept soon after I'd reached that epiphany. What's most interesting about the Vera concept is that my mother-in-law is named Vera. And I told my wife that, geez, Volvo's named the over-the-road tractor trailer rig after your mother. And she didn't think that was as funny as I thought it was, but I thought it was somewhat ironic that they named it after my mother-in-law. My point here with all these earlier slides is that when we transition from the age of automobiles to the age of automobility, we go from human-driven to autonomous, combustion to electric, vehicles are a product of transportation as a service, with diverse energy, tailored design vehicles that deliver compelling riding experiences that are optimized for cost per mile. So this isn't about just electric vehicles or just freeing up my time when I drive. It's a combination of technology innovation and business model innovation. And it's the convergence of technologies, no one technology by itself. Very exciting opportunity. At maturity, we're going to have significantly safer transportation for all road users. Safety will be the price of entry, and the safety leader will be the market leader, in my opinion. Nearly all the trips will be provided by transportation services with autonomous electric vehicles. Riders will subscribe to transportation services rather than owning their own car, and they're going to pay for vehicle use by trip, hour, day, week, month, or year, the miles traveled, and the rider experiences. The vehicles are going to be owned and managed primarily as fleets, as opposed to being managed and owned individually. They're going to be tailored design for ultimate riding and logistics machines. There'll be value segments and premium segments optimized for total cost per mile. And very, very importantly, they'll be sustainable for future generations. Diverse sources of renewable energy with no harmful vehicle emissions, with much more equal access to the economy, to education, to whatever you want to get to, and be significantly more efficient in the use of energy, capital, time, and materials. So this is an extraordinary opportunity. You know, I can't predict exactly when it's going to play out, but certainly compelling opportunity. And it's important to think about this disruption, not just in terms of it's disrupting the auto industry, or it's going to disrupt Uber drivers or truck drivers. It's going to disrupt retail because it's so synergistic with e-commerce. It's going to disrupt energy because we're going to get off oil. It disrupts the parking industry, the vehicle finance industry, the insurance industry. Real estate is going to transform, as are transportation services. Now, this isn't all a beautiful, perfect story. There are going to be some very real and important headwinds. The first and foremost one is premature judgment. And I would ask the people listening in tonight, how many of you have had a chance to ride in a truly autonomous vehicles? I get to do that a lot because I'm an advisor to Waymo. But I can assure you, once you're in this vehicle for a few minutes, you suddenly begin to transform. You suddenly realize what this is all about and how compelling it is. We're also going to have headwinds from those players with a huge vested interest in the 100-year-old automobile transportation system. ExxonMobil isn't going to roll over and play dead. Saudi Aramco isn't either. They're going to push hard to protect their interests in using oil for transportation. And we need to anticipate that because that's just a reality. And then finally, the jobs implications. We've gone through major economic transformations in history, from an agrarian economy to an industrial economy, and a lot of people transitioned out of farming into manufacturing. And we will see this with the digital economy. It's really hard to sit here and say, we'll have more jobs that pay better than what we've had in the past. My hope is that the case. I haven't seen that picture yet. So the jobs implications I take very, very seriously. And that's why I think Osher lifetime learning institutes are so important, because people are going to have to use lifetime learning to transition to this transformation. So the age of automobility truly is a transformational opportunity. There's no question about it. It's going to give us greater autonomy. We've made substantial progress toward realizing this potential. I believe the safety leader will be the market leader. You'll be able to provide better ride, go more places, and certainly the companies I work with have safety as the overriding priority as we do our development work. There's more innovation coming. In fact, I think the innovation in this space is in its infancy. So it's going to just be amazing where we're going to be in 10 years. It's a disruptive change, so it's going to put a lot of people in an uncomfortable spot. I think it's inevitable. It truly appears inevitable. And when something is inevitable, you've got to do unto yourself before others do unto you. That's really a good guiding strategy, because there's really no way to hide if something is truly inevitable. So I really want you to enjoy the ride. This happens to be a photo from an automobile magazine. It was a cover photo after the autonomy concept was revealed in Detroit in 2002. And it tries to give you a sense of the fun that's going to be associated with this. And I really do enjoy the ride quite a bit working on these technologies. I hope you enjoy the read. It was a lot of fun writing this book with a great team from HarperCollins, as well as Christopher Shogan, my co-author. And very importantly, I hope you enjoy lifelong learning. And I can't express my appreciation enough for what Osher Lifelong Learning Institute is doing to provide the learning opportunities for people over 50. So that's really what I wanted to present. I'm going to stop my screen sharing at this point. And then Pat, I think you're going to jump in and help us moderate going forward.
Yeah, get the questions going here. So Larry, first of all, I just want to thank you for taking the time to write this book. When Lisa did the introduction, he gave the warning that skeptics beware when they read this book. And I approached it as a healthy skeptic. You know, just I wanted to see something there. But in my work, knowing what all the barriers could be to really disruptive marketplaces, I didn't know that if I would ever see it in my lifetime. And so having read the book, particularly the format you chose, a narrative and all the excitement around it, really talking about the characters and the real challenges that the technologists and the roboticists face, I'm a believer. I've come through, I think we see in the presentation tonight, a lot of the elements that are components of this growing marketplace. For me, the question is not if, the question is when. And I think that that is really how I'd kind of like to want to start to approach the conversation today. Just let me ask you kind of in an open-ended way, how would you prepare for the future that you just shared for us? What do you think going forward we ought to be thinking about toward a world of driverless cars?
Yeah, I'd be happy to address that. And I'm going to answer the when question in that context as well, Pat, because it's a very, very important question. First of all, you know, I've had the privilege of leading a large research and development laboratory. So I've been in the innovation business for quite a while, and I've had a chance to advise 60, 70 companies, and no one has a perfect formula for how to innovate. And I'm sure at your institute, you would say the same thing. There's not one size fit all answer here, but I think it's real important for people to prepare by first deeply understanding what's possible. Engineers make what's possible real. I'm an engineer, and that's what we do. We make what is possible real. So you have to understand that you don't understand it by going to a conference. You don't understand it by reading a journal article. You understand it by working on the forefront of knowledge. Mm-hmm. And companies need to have access, a seat at the table with the people who are really working on the cutting edge of knowledge. And those are the people who can answer the when question. And I joke about economists a lot. You can lay all the economists in the world end to end and they still won't reach a conclusion. So the whole idea of forecasting and answering a question on when leaves me a little bit empty. What I focus on instead, and this is part of the preparation, is what I call the market tipping point. That's that magical moment when the value that a customer gets out of an innovation exceeds its price and the price exceeds its cost. Mm-hmm. Why is that so magical? Because they'll buy it if the price is less than the value, and someone's going to make it if the cost is less than the price. Then it's just a scaling exercise. So I try to really understand when will all those forces tip. And I think we're in a 3 to 5 year window with the maturing of autonomous driving. That's truly, you don't have to drive at all. It's not, you have to drive sometimes. You're not the driver of the car. And electric vehicles have already tipped in my mindset. And I think you're going to be in this 3 to 5 year time frame, and you can already see where the smart money's going. That's why Tesla's valuation is as high as it is. That's why Nikola's IPO or their SPAC was so extremely highly valued. So I think it's a tipping point to pay attention to. Mm-hmm. Then you've got a position for the future, and learning is how you do that. Learning is the foundation of innovation. Focus on customer experiences. Use integrative thinking. I've learned over the years that the word and is an extremely powerful word versus the word or. Mm-hmm. So A and B oftentimes are better than A or B. So use integrative thinking. I think that's key. As I mentioned before, you got to get in front of the inevitable. You know, if something's inevitable, I think you're better off to be prepared early, even if it happens later, than to be prepared late if it happens earlier. Mm-hmm. And you really won't catch up in that latter case. And then finally, I think find a good partner. You look at the history of innovation, and many of the great innovations had teams of people. You know, Procter and Gamble. You had Gates and Allen at Microsoft. You had Page and Bren at Google. and on it goes. So those are some of the things I take away for getting prepared. But I think we're in a 3 to 5 year window for the tipping point, Pat.
And when you talk 3 to 5 year, what kind of a vision are you thinking, or what are the options around that? Are we talking about a fleet service of shared vehicles? Are we talking someone being able to go and make an individual purchase? What do you think is going to kind of drive the emergence of this marketplace?
First of all, I think goods movement will play out before people movement. And why do I believe that? It's real clear what the value of time is for the driver in an over-the-road truck is 73 cents a mile. That's wages and benefits. So the business case becomes crystal clear. Secondly, when you are moving goods autonomously, you don't have to have occupant protection for the vehicle. You're protecting envelopes and boxes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then finally, that vehicle doesn't have to always take the most direct, fastest route. It can take the safest route.
Yeah.
So if you're struggling a little bit right now trying to do what's called an unprotected left turn with your autonomous vehicle, make 3 rights and take a little bit longer, but do the safe thing. So I think you're going to see this thing really play out. And if you look at the interstate system, there's 47,000 miles of interstate. You take the lowest risk 10% of that, 500 miles. Those 500 miles are dramatically lower risk than the highest risk 500 miles. So you don't have to solve everything to get started. So what I'm seeing in this 3 to 5 year window will be some companies that are actually moving freight on the low risk stretches of the interstate without drivers in the vehicles and making money.
Yeah.
So if you hit that point, if you've got a positive cash flow business that now you can scale through learning cycles, Wall Street's going to reward you handsomely. That's what I think is going to happen. Yeah. On the people movement side, it's probably going to be specific rideshare, robotaxi kinds of applications, maybe lower speed, campus-based, that type of a thing.
Yeah, excellent. On the transition to trucking, tell me how much you worry about the policy arena around that. You talked a little bit about the headwinds that the sector can face, and we know that interstate, highways and the trucking industry are well regulated, and there are vested interests inside of the trucking industry. What do you see as the barriers there? Are you familiar enough with that regime to know whether we're at a tipping point on the regulatory side? Are there special ways in which we have to address those kinds of challenges?
Well, first of all, I want to compliment the regulators. The easiest thing for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to have done, or the Caltrans, the California Transportation Department, or California Highway or patrol people to have done was say, you can't develop your autonomous vehicles on public roads. Easiest thing to say. They could have protected themselves and covered themselves with that simple edict. They didn't do it. Good. They had enough wisdom and enough vision. This is NHTSA and other state transportation departments to say, we get it. In order to realize the full safety benefits and societal benefits of this technology, we understand you have to perfect it on public roads. You have to understand all the things that humans do and handle in everyday driving. And so they didn't clamp down. They didn't take that really hard stand and say no. And I really give Secretary Fox at the time, the head of DOT, a lot of credit for taking that approach. And so I compliment them. At the same time, they have a responsibility to protect the safety of U.S. citizens and state citizens. They're going to take their job very seriously. So the key is to work together proactively. Now, we're going to hear a lot of pushback because Boeing was working proactively with FAA in theory. And now we've got the 737 MAX situation. And there's a lot of reports being written saying it was the regulators gave too much authority to the developers. So we're going to have to work that balancing act. So we're going to have to be transparent with the data. We're going to have the right metrics. But I remain pretty encouraged about the regulatory mindset so far.
No, I'm so pleased to hear that. I'm so pleased to hear that. I do think that you made another interesting point in the book that was fascinating when we were at I think it was the Urban Challenge. Silicon Valley sent in a flight of executives to arrive and kind of celebrate the achievement of that competition. In Detroit, we had one executive, it was yourself. How committed or how supportive can Detroit really be in this transition at this moment in time?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because obviously I grew up in Southeast Michigan. I went to General Motors Institute for my mechanical engineering degree. GM paid for my master's and helped with my PhD. And then I worked for the company from 1978 to 2009. So I have a lot of passion for this. At the same time, when we had the DARPA challenge, we had leaders of the auto companies who were not deeply knowledgeable of digital technology. They were finance people or marketing people, and they didn't really have the same feel that a Larry Page or Sergey Brin had for what could be possible. Yeah. And I left GM in late 2009, and I was out doing a lot of public speaking, being an evangelist for what I believed was coming. And a lot of auto executives would be in the audience, and they would raise their hand and say, "Come on, Larry, you can't let technology get in front of safety. We'll eventually get the driver out of the car, maybe in 2030, maybe 2040. And I said, "No, you guys." And I knew at the time I'm working with Google self-driving cars, this thing is coming and it's coming fast. It wasn't until about 2016 when Uber hired the Carnegie Mellon team of talent.
Yeah.
So first of all, Google had the pick of the litter from the DARPA challenge. Then
right.
Probably the second best team of players was at Carnegie Mellon, and Uber came and hired them with amazing bonuses. I think the boards of the major auto companies finally asked their CEOs, "What's going on here? When are you going to get in this game?" And then you saw GM approach Cruise Automation and acquire them. Ford did their deal with Argo. And so they finally got into the game 2016 or 17. I think GM in particular has a pretty strong hand to play. They're doing some good jobs with coming electric vehicles, over 20 of them off of the same platform called the Origin platform. They just did this deal with Nikola with fuel cell electric over-the-road trucks. And they've got Cruise Automation, and then they have what's called a level 2 system called GM Super Cruise, which lets you take your hands up.
Do you see fuel cells being in the mix on automobiles as well?
Yeah, Pat, I see that as an batteries and fuel cells. If I could do one thing over in my career, because I had GM's fuel cell program report through me and I was out there publicly talking about it a lot, I probably wouldn't use the term fuel cell. I would have just called it a hydrogen battery. It's really a different kind of a battery.
Yeah.
For some reason, fuel cell makes people think of something totally different than batteries, but you can make electricity from hydrogen. You can make hydrogen from electricity. The electric motors, the power electronics controls are all the same on the vehicles. It's just a different way of storing energy on board.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think if you need to transfer a lot of energy to the vehicle fast, hydrogen's going to beat batteries. If you really want long range with heavier duty cycle loads, hydrogen's going to be batteries. And I think the excitement about Nikola right now is evidence of the fact that fuel cells are still in the game. But if you ask me what's my biggest technological surprise since leaving GM in 2009, it would be the rapid development of batteries beyond what we had on our roadmap when I left GM in 2009. So batteries are really going.
Is that a Tesla phenomena?
Well, I think Tesla played a hugely important role. I think they provided the use case and the evidence that they could disrupt the premium automobile industry. They quickly became the most highest selling vehicle above $80,000. And that was a shock to Mercedes and BMW and Audis and others who play in that segment.
Oh, yeah.
And, although it's taken them longer to get the positive cash flow and accomplish some of the goals, you got to give them credit. And if you have a chance to drive a Tesla, you realize why their customers are so passionate. They've delivered a great experience, a really exciting total experience, not just an electric car.
Yeah. I want to get into a little bit of the bumps in autonomy. Tesla is the story that comes to mind. It's their early deployment of what we call assisted technologies or driver assist technologies. They kind of got them in trouble. Do you worry about that? Do you want to talk a little bit about what happened there and whether those type of things we
Yeah.
should worry about with autonomy?
Yeah. Yeah, as I mentioned, safety has to be the overriding priority. I think the safety leader will be the market leader. And I think there's always a risk of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You can see how that played out with fracking for natural gas. And there was a risk that fracking would be shut down because there were wildcatters out there who weren't casing their wells properly, and methane was leaking into the water table. So I think if you do follow best practices, and Waymo has an extraordinary safety record. I won't even knock on wood over that because it's not luck. It's because they have truly a disciplined learning process to do this very, very well. So I worry about the incidences, and there have been two that have received significant publicity. The first was a Tesla Model S with a gentleman driving in Florida. The Model S's autopilot is designed for interstates, not just limited access highways. This happened to be a highway with a truck coming across on a slight rise in Florida. There's not many hills in Florida, and the driver, at least the postmortem suggests, was not paying full attention and drove under the trailer and was killed. And a lot of people felt it was wrong for Tesla to call their system autopilot. I included in that. I don't think it should be called autopilot. And I lay that out carefully in the book. And secondly, Elaine Herzberg, who was a woman in Phoenix, was crossing with her bicycle at night, and a test driver for Uber's driverless car system. They had disabled the safety systems on that vehicle and wasn't paying attention evidently, and hit Ms. Herzberg and killed her. So I think those are very serious situations, but today in the United States, we have about 100 people a day dying on roadways.
Absolutely.
And, the analogy I like to make is, ironically, it's a vaccine analogy. And if you go get your flu shot and you turn the page over that the drugstore asks you to sign, you'll see in the lower right corner a thing called the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. Turns out 25 cents of every flu shot goes to the Department of Treasury to fund a pool of money to compensate people who get injured from vaccines. And they needed to do that because the developers were worried about the liability of coming to market with risk with the vaccine of allergic reaction, and people were worried about getting the vaccine. And so they broke that logjam with this. So I think it's that kind of mentality. If we could save 90 to 95% of the lives, Pat, by getting to autonomous, and we create a different category of risk, but a radically lower absolute number of deaths, that's the right place for society to go to. And we need to figure out a way to get there.
It's compelling in your book. It's very clear in how to condition the marketplace to really, that's part of the tipping point. How do you get people to understand that and accept that? What do you think are the remaining barriers, the biggest barriers? I'm going to kind of walk through some of the typical categories, and you just kind of react to it from a technology point of view. Mind you, I start with the mindset that the development has been explosive since the DARPA challenge right through to Waymo's achievement. And driverless cars have been always spoken about as being around the corner. And so the question is, what are the barriers to, it's been a couple of years now, around the corner. What are the barriers? Let's start with technology. Where do you think it is there in terms of deploying?
Yeah, Pat, I don't think anything needs to be invented.
You think
I think it's learning. It's learning cycles. You see, there's a lot of very subtle things that happen in real world driving. So let's say there's an east-west road, and you're heading west and the sun's going down, and your autonomous driving system has been on that several times, has learned how to drive that. But on this particular day, there's a little bit of dust in the air, and there's a tree up the road, and there's a branch hanging down, and the tree branch is swaying in a direction that car hasn't seen before. And combined with the dust, the car doesn't know exactly what's going on. And the car will pull over and stop. So it's not going to be a safety risk. It's going to be an inconvenience until the car can figure out, what am I going to do with this situation? That's why machine learning is such an important enabling tool. and advanced simulation. What we have found is it's proven to be harder than we thought to handle these last 0.1% of the challenges that are part of the driving task.
Mm-hmm.
So that's become harder than we thought. It's taken more time. At the
Yeah.
same time, the tools that we have to get that handled have advanced faster than we ever imagined. Machine learning.
That's very
Yeah.
helpful.
And then I want to make a point. You don't have to solve 100% of those in order to have a commercial business. You have to think about the use cases. You have to find the situations in which you have proven safety. And when you've got enough of that accumulated to have a commercial value proposition to someone, you can go into business.
Yeah.
So don't get trapped into thinking everything has to be perfect. Perfect is the enemy of good enough. And I think this is going to be able to be commercialized before we have everything perfectly handled. The example I gave is with the interstate system. We don't have to solve all 47,000 miles of the interstate in order for autonomous technology to benefit freight movement.
Yeah. How about the infrastructure piece, just general infrastructure to support this?
Yeah. It's a great question because most people think about roadway infrastructure as highways and bridges and signs and policing. It's a different kind of infrastructure. It's databases and satellites. And there may be some places where we might have very modest roadway infrastructure, but the big moment in this technology was the realization we could get it done with the smarts being in the vehicle, in the satellite, in the maps, in the databases, not in the roadway. Mm-hmm. Because then you didn't have to spend all that investment in the roadway to make it possible. So it was that group of people in the DARPA challenge, some of the early players, when we came to the realization, we think we can pull this off without roadway infrastructure. That was a big deal. And that was very liberating for us to get on with it. So I don't think that's going to be a showstopper, but certainly the companies that have enormously deep capability in digital maps, massive server capacity, and really understand where 5G is headed and all of that, those are big advantages, especially those who understand machine learning and advanced simulation. And then these happen to be the same companies who have access to the very best talent, and they have trillion-dollar market caps. Yeah. So there's a lot of potential resource to go at this thing. I don't think infrastructure is going to be the issue.
Yeah. Then regulatory. I mean, I think that, urban planning and accommodating this mobility revolution is going to have to be recognized by municipalities and provided for. Do you think are there any best practices or ways in which
I've done quite a bit of advising with the insurance industry. And I find that very, very interesting because if you eliminate the crash, the whole actuarial model behind car insurance changes dramatically. Yeah. There's a lot of lawyers who make a lot of money because car crashes happen. Mm-hmm. And so they're going to be thinking about this. I like to joke if there's two lawyers hanging from a cliff by their fingertips and you can only save one, would you go to lunch or read the newspaper? So I'm hoping I'm not offending the lawyers out there. But there's going to be pushback from the trial lawyers on this. And everybody's going to be looking for that button, reason why we shouldn't go here. But you just can't deny these societal benefits that I laid out.
You can't.
Eliminating traffic fatalities, making equality of access, freeing up land that's used for parking, enormous wasted capital for cars sitting around parked. There's 3 parking spots for every car in America. And very, very importantly, getting off of oil and tailor designing the car so it's more of a 1,500 to 2,000 pound machine rather than 4,000 to 5,000 pound machine. I like to talk about a concept called secondhand physics. When someone rides in a black Escalade in Manhattan on the avenues or streets at 30 or 40 miles an hour, a pedestrian is pretty darn vulnerable. But that Escalade isn't paying an externality tax on the risk that it's putting on vulnerable road users. We had secondhand smoke realized as a health issue. If you smoked and you were in my proximity, you could make me sick.
Right.
And society stepped up to that and we dealt with it. And you rarely see people smoking in public anymore. Yeah. I think we're going to come around
to the real risk around these machines is they're just way over designed.
Yeah.
Think about it this way. Most humans weigh 150 to 200 pounds, and most cars weigh 3,000 to 4,000 pounds.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
you burn a gallon of gasoline in a car, 70 to 80% of it's lost its heat.
Yeah.
So 20 to 25% moves the driver and the vehicle. The vehicle weighs 3,000 to 4,000 pounds, the driver 150 to 200. So only 1.5% of the BTUs in a gallon of gasoline moves the driver. Think about it.
Yeah.
And as engineers, we can't do better than that. Come
No,
on.
I have to tell you, that was one of the most compelling pieces in the book, the disconnect between what you need a vehicle for and what society invests and purchases and parks into our garage for that duration of time. It comes to what is another barrier that I think is probably the most significant one of all, which is public attitude, sentiment, individual skepticism. When you talk to most inventors or people with new products, in their heart of hearts, they know that their greatest competition in what they are trying to do is the competition against status quo.
Yeah.
Status quo. People kind of, cars is the internal combustion engine is all they have known. What you have painted in this book is something revolutionary, really. And where are we going to address that skepticism or
I think
status quo or love for the vehicle?
I think it's like anything. You take a device like my iPhone, and when General Motors Automotive Strategy Board said we got to get contemporary, we need to have handheld devices. So we got BlackBerries. So we're all typing on our little BlackBerry, and we were all resisting like mad switching to the user interface that comes with an iPhone.
Yeah.
Finally, we try it, and we begin to master it, and you realize how ingenious it is. And with everything, all I ask before one becomes skeptical is ride in a truly state-of-the-art, fully autonomous vehicle on a real road. Let me tell you my very first experience on public roads, because I rode in them a lot on test tracks.
Yeah.
The first experience on a public road was in late 2010. And it turned out Google self-driving cars had been developing their system in a very stealth manner. They had 13 Toyota Priuses that they had equipped, and Larry Page and Sergey Brin had given a team some challenges. They had to drive 10 100-mile routes that Larry and Sergey had laid out. They had to accumulate 100,000 miles.
Yeah.
And they were almost finished with meeting those challenges, and a New York Times writer sniffed out what they were up to.
That's right.
And they were about to write a very scathing article, and Google called me up and said, would I talk to this reporter? And I said, yeah, but how could you possibly be developing cars on public roads? And they brought me out there, and I said, I need to have a ride in the car to help you. And they said, fine. And it turns out these engineers read the law as you needed to have a driver in the driver's seat. The driver didn't have to touch the steering wheel, the brake pedal, or the gas pedal. So I get in this Prius, I get on 101, I engage the self-driving car system. Honest God, Pat, within 5 minutes, I was totally comfortable.
Yeah.
Kicking back, and the car was doing so many intuitive things. This was 2010.
Yeah.
We've had 10 more years of development on this.
Yeah, Larry, was that the moment, I was going to ask, it's on my list, is that the moment when you realized that, was that transformational for you? This is real, this is something we can do. When did that happen for you?
Really happened in the DARPA Urban Challenge. It was a very important moment. So we had 14 teams make the finals, and you had to go 60 miles in the simulated residential setting. It was Victorville, California, military base. And we had human-driven cars mixed in with our autonomous cars, and you had to obey all the traffic laws. And the GM Carnegie Mellon team did all of that faster than anyone else and with greater precision and safety than anyone else. And Tony Tether, who was the head of DARPA, was handing out the $2 million check. And I jokingly say GM needed the $2 million because we were going bankrupt. But he hands out the check, and I said, Tony, when's our next race? And he said, mission accomplished. I said, what are you talking about? He said, you guys, not just your team, but all these teams, remember 80 teams entered that race, 35 built cars, 14 made it to the race finals. He said, all of you collectively has convinced DARPA that this is possible. And now it's just a matter of commercialization. It's a matter of learning cycle. So that was really the moment where I said the world's going to change big time. And I was asked at that point in time, when did I think it was going to be ready? And I said, about 10 years. So about 2017, I was thinking, and I've missed it by a bit, Pat, but we're pretty darn close.
That's when the technology will be ready.
Yeah. You said it sounds like autonomous cars are always just around the corner. Think about this. It was just in late 2007, let's call it 2008, it's November 2007. That's when we had a test track proof of concept under very controlled conditions. Yeah. And we've hammered at this now for 13 years, and it wasn't until 2 years after that Google committed to doing it. So we've really been at it 11 years in a significant way. Yeah. And I don't think, I'm not at all concerned about how much time has taken so far. I think the media tells the story in a way, but no, I think we've made great progress.
We're going to get other folks' questions in shortly, but I want to just change gears here a bit for you. On the international scene, competition, we've learned that AutoX, a Chinese startup, has been backed by Alibaba and applied for a license to test a driverless car in California. What do you think the global competition is like around developing a driverless car? Has Silicon Valley given us a real jump on this thing? And is there?
I'm sure in your institute you've studied the history of a lot of different innovations, especially those tied to the U.S. economy. And oftentimes we had the cutting edge technology, we had the scientific breakthroughs, a true visionary lead. And lo and behold, other countries ran with it and established the true commercial manufacturing base to make it all possible. And we can't continue to let the nation have these things play out that way. Yes, I do wake up in the middle and I'm concerned about the potential of China running away with this prize. Their regulatory environment is different. Their urbanization is different. I mentioned earlier the concept, the ENVY concept for the 2010 Shanghai World Expo. Our job with our pavilion there was better city, better life in the year 2030. And we were doing this back in the 2008, 2009 timeframe. And we calculated then that if the number of cars in Shanghai grew at the rate the next 10 years that they had the last 10 years, 80% of the land in Shanghai would be covered with cars. That's not going to be possible. So China has a really big reason to get to electric vehicles, to get to autonomous vehicles, and to get to the vehicle fleet being shared use transportation systems. And they're going to go for it. They're going to build it into their 5-year plans. And we have to stay ahead of them in that race. So yes, I remain concerned. European capabilities, I have just tremendous respect for the engineering capabilities of nations all over the world. Israel, Korea, Mexico, Germany, on and on you go, Japan, Taiwan, China. I've worked with engineers from all of those countries. And US doesn't have any corner on the brains, Pat. These people have the same motivations we have. And so, yes, we've got to think about this through a global lens. I'm glad you raised that point.
Lawrence, you talk a little bit about the employment disruption, the kinds of positions and threats threatening threats it is to current employees, but tell us a little bit about the new opportunities that can emerge.
There's 4 million Americans who, when they check the census box, check driver as their employment. It's the, I think, second most common box checked. That's a lot of workers. So those are truck drivers, they're taxi drivers, there's forklift drivers and others. But the bigger economic impact is going to be the fact that there's half as many parts in the car. So you think about it, every part, if there's twice as many parts, it's more assembly workers, that's more supply workers, that's more engineers, it's more purchasing agents, it's more logistics, more shipping. And so when you pull that huge lever on the number of parts in a car, Einstein said the best design is the simplest one that works. Now we have a much simpler design that works better than an autonomous electric car.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so the jobs implications there are going to be enormous. Now let's not stop there. Then you got the parking industry. You've got the corner gas station, because I believe these will be fleets that are going to get energized much differently than someone pulling into a corner gas station to refuel their car. The maintenance on an electric vehicle is dramatically less. You don't have oil changes, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And the life of the electric vehicles are going to be much greater. Some people are talking 500,000 mile life batteries and greater. And so if you suddenly have vehicles lasting twice as long, serving the same number of miles, you need half as many vehicles. And then they have half as many parts. That is the jobs impact that really is on my mind as much as the driver. That's why this lifelong learning is so important. So many people think their education is a destination. It's not, it's a start.
Yeah.
And we need to anticipate that for people above 50, people above 40. That's going to be dramatic. And it's not just the transportation sector. I led a study for the National Academy of Engineering called Making Value for America. This was in 2011, 2012. And we are looking at the huge ramifications of the digital economy on jobs.
Yeah.
And Andrew Yang, quite honestly, in the Democratic primary, was flirting with this quite a bit. What's coming at us? We need more of our policymakers to wake up to that.
What we find is that the emergence of AI, machine learning, while it is displacing, that in many other sectors, it creates new opportunities and new chances for innovation and new products. And we just have to drive the competencies up the value chain as best we can so more people can take advantage of it. And you don't have to be the scientists and the engineers that are creating these systems. There's a whole body workforce underneath that. And so is there a comparable in this mobility space, or does it look like it'll
what do we get? So let's say you're riding autonomously. Let's take this scenario. Rather than me flying from Detroit to New York for a business meeting, I get in an autonomous vehicle that's like a mobile home. It's like a mobile hotel room. And I get in at 8 at night, and it autonomously goes from Detroit to Manhattan, and I'm sleeping in it. I'm showering in it. I'm dressing in it for my business meeting. And I have a tremendous experience. I think there's all kinds of opportunities for experience design and how people are going to integrate this new form of transportation into different kind of life experiences. My younger daughter is a chef. She's a culinary arts, and she does food research. And a lot of people are saying 80% of the restaurants won't make it through this pandemic downturn. That doesn't mean people don't want to eat out. That doesn't mean they don't want to go get a bottle of wine. There's going to be a new set of innovation that comes along to satisfy that need to enjoy food and enjoy drink like that. And it might be virtual in some ways. It might be autonomous vehicles delivering supplies to her home kitchen, and she delivers finished meals to people eating in different locations. There's all kinds of new things that are going to crop up. What I can't say is that I know those are going to be the same kind of middle class jobs that came with the auto industry in the 50s and 60s, and paying as well as they did, and having the same quantity. That's to be determined.
Yeah. Do you think that 3 to 5 years for ride sharing, possibly the trucking industry, when do you think that the vehicle is going to be available for the individual consumer to want to come in and purchase?
I would push that out. I would say in some places, maybe 5, 6, 7 years, because they're the lead applications, like in Chandler, Arizona, where Waymo's doing their development work. You've got people taking those rides today. Now, they haven't given up their car and relying totally on Waymo service yet. It's a very small scale application. So I think you're going to start in those areas where you can manage the risk. And so some people are going to be experiencing it. But I think it's fair to say you're in that 7, 8, 9 year time frame. But again,
and when they do that, they won't. They're not going to come in and purchase a car that has no. I mean, the driverless fleet is integrated. They're going to have a steering wheel in front of their car
Well, I think that's to be determined. I think you're going to have some cars that have a human control system and an autonomous capability, both.
Yeah.
And for some of the time you're sitting there not having to be engaged in driving, and some of the
Yeah.
time you are engaged in driving. But that's a more costly car because you've got those extra parts. I think you're also going to have truly vehicles designed without human driving controls
Yeah.
as well, especially these over-the-road trucks. And
Yeah.
again, I try not to put a forecast on it. I learned long ago that as soon as I put a date and a quantity out there, the media will write an article about it. And then when that date and quantity arrives and it wasn't right, they go after you. And that's not what we need here. We need to keep learning.
Yes.
Learning is the foundation of innovation.
It is.
Learning, lifelong learning is the foundation of career success. And as long as we keep learning, we're going to get to these benefits.
Larry, you've done that for all of us in this space. I'm going to turn it over to Lisa so she can get some feedback or some questions in from the audience. But I've truly enjoyed this. I love the book.
Oh, I did too.
I'm
Great
enthralled
questions.
with your vision, and you're really helping to drive a market here.
Yeah,
Thank
great
you so
questions.
much.
Thanks a lot for your help.
Great questions, Pat. And we have so many questions from all of you out there. So
Imagine.
I'm gonna get right to it. From Robert Huss, who is in Northern California. He's been dealing with local fires and the virus, and he wants to know, can today's technology function in poor visibility areas like Chico, California, where he is?
Say the last part. Say the question one more time, Lisa. Can they do what in the Chico area?
Technology function in poor visibility areas.
Oh, poor visibility. You know,
I think the Highlander
I would
solved
say
that.
certainly poorer visibility than what we as humans can. You've got LiDAR, which are lasers, and you've got radar, and you've got cameras. And so yes, and it is interesting. Even dust is something that we comprehend with our sensors. I don't want to give an answer that's absolute, that I can see in all conditions. There's snow conditions that we haven't tried to handle yet, and both the visibility of the snow and really hard rain, which we've got, Waymo has test vehicles in the Miami area because Miami gets a lot of really hard rain. So what I would say, Robert, is probably not right now in all cases, but does the potential exist to learn how to do that given the approach we're taking? And I absolutely believe so.
So Will is asking, in your opinion, what sort of national level investment on par with the interstate system is needed to make electric cars ubiquitous? Is it better batteries or charging stations or something else?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be anywhere near the scale of the interstate system. I don't have a number at my fingertips in today's dollars, what's been spent in total on the 47,000 miles of the interstate system, but it has to be an absolutely massive number. I'll answer that with a little bit of insight from hydrogen and not necessarily batteries, but I think it carries over. We did a study that if you had a hydrogen station every 20 miles on those 47,000 miles of interstate, and then you had a station located so that you were never more than 2 miles from a station in the downtown of the 100 largest cities, you would need 12,000 hydrogen stations. That's not an enormously big investment number on the scale of things. I don't think it's that kind of investment that's going to be a showstopper here. I think the thing that really was my really big moment, my biggest epiphany on this is when I realized that we could have better transportation at lower consumer cost and at radically lower societal cost. My whole career meant there used to say there was a trade-off. Yes, I could have better, but it would cost more. Or yes, I could have zero emissions, but it would cost more. I think the convergence of autonomous electric vehicles and these different business models finally got to the point where we can have it all simultaneously. It's just hang in there with the learning, and we'll get this perfected, and people are going to really love it.
Two questions that I'll ask that are related to one another. One is from B. Maxwell, and the other is from Gordon Josephson. B. Maxwell says, Larry, I get how it will be a lower consumer cost, but how will it be more spontaneous? It seems like it would require some additional planning to go to the store or anywhere. And then Jordan says part of the positive driver experience is having a car at our disposal when we want it, not having to wait
Absolutely.
even for a second is, that could really be an impediment to all of this.
Yeah. Well, first of all, if you want to have your own, you can. I mean, you can lease. My vision of the business model would be, think about when you ask for an Uber ride, you've got exclusive use of that Uber vehicle for that trip. Now let's say you needed a vehicle for the morning because you're going to go to 4 stores and shop and you don't want to take your bags in and out of the same car. Then you could ask for the vehicle for the morning or for a day or for a week, a month, or a year. If you did it for a year, it's like a lease. And you could have dispatch control over it. And if you want it sitting right outside at your beck and call, you can do that. But really where it's going to sit is where it's most economic for it to sit. You're not even going to wonder where your car is waiting for you because you're going to be dropped off at the door, picked up at the door, and the car is going to learn your habits, and it's going to know there to be ready to get you when you want to go. And you're not going to be walking 5 levels up a parking structure. Lisa, when I taught at University of Michigan, I had an office on the North Campus, and about 3.5 miles away were a main campus where I had lectures sometimes. And I would sometimes take my car because I'd drive home after that lecture. I'd drive 7 levels up a parking structure with my fingers crossed, hoping I could find a place to park. I had to budget 45 minutes for a 3.5 mile trip. Most of that was driving a parking structure. So this idea that the car is always more spontaneous, when you factor in parking and your walking time and all of that stuff, it's not always the case. We're talking about a solution where you hit that app and less than a couple minutes, the vehicles are ready for you to go. And it drops you off at the door where you want to get to. And I think it's going to be spontaneous, absolutely, and responsive.
Brad wants to know what happens when there's a younger generation growing up not knowing how to drive.
that is a great question. And a lot of younger people would much rather put their money into this and everything affiliated with it than a car. And they're postponing getting their driver's licenses. I think that's one of the reasons why we want to get to this autonomous vehicle, because there's no reason why those people should be forced to learn how to drive in order to engage fully in the economy. And today, at least in the United States, that's predominantly the answer that you get. You get to the car to get the freedom to go where you want to when you want to. So I think, one of the things that was very eye-opening to me because of my R&D job at JAM when I studied the safety data was just how much higher risk a 16, 17, and 18-year-old man or woman that are because they're not experienced at driving than an experienced driver. For a man, they're 8 times more likely for an 18 to 21-year-old to get in a serious crash than an experienced driver. It's 3.5 times for a woman. And geez, that means driving is a hard thing to do. And I think we're going to get a lot of that risk out of the system without having everybody required to be the driver. When you make Waymo's driver better, every Waymo car gets better. That's the amazing thing. Every time you learn how to make the robotic driver safer, every one of the cars. Now, when I learn how to drive better, I might convince my wife. I might tell my kids, but that's about it. So I think there's huge opportunities there.
I like this question from Stephen Meisel. He says, do I give up my personal freedom to the new fleet owner? Is the fleet owner the new platform baron like Zuckerberg, who makes the rules to whom I must click I accept?
I'm not totally sure I understand the question, Lisa.
You think, do I give up my personal freedom to the new fleet owner? In other words, if you have your own car, right, you're not reporting into the baron of all cars. But just like Mark Zuckerberg is the overlord of Facebook, if you are not having your own car, do you now have to click, and Lord only knows what information they're going to be getting from you and where you go when it's no longer your car?
I hope not. I guess I'll answer it that way. Again, a lot of people are going to have a subscription-based system because it's going to be dramatically lower, dramatically greater value. And a lot of homes today have 2 and 3 cars. And I think if you subscribe to one vehicle, you may be able to function as a household with just 1 rather than 2, or just 2 rather than 3. And so I don't think this is always going to be, every individual is going to be beholden to some master shared vehicle system. At the same time, I think there's going to be a lot of competition among these fleet services
No,
because
it's an interesting
it's
question.
business. And I think that competition is going to be part of the solution.
Because
Pat, did you
the
want
other
to say
piece to it, like Facebook, they take advantage of the captured customer and the eyeballs to, to market, to sell, to add value add, to do something that they can monetize. So that's related to that question. It's kind of it controls the territory, it's moving the people around, and it's an opportunity for the shared rider service to sell more products into it. So I think there has to be some concern around that.
I think it's a very, very fair concern. It is interesting when I look back, and obviously I'm older than a lot of people now, but when I was growing up, my parents taught me two things over and over again: never play with matches and never get in a car with a stranger. The entire Uber and Lyft business model violated that second one, getting in the car with a stranger. So I could imagine 50, 60 years ago, people saying, we would never have shared rides because you have to get in a car with a stranger. But yet, when suddenly Uber offered something of great value to people, as a society, we find a way to work through that.
Yeah.
So yeah. I'm optimistic by nature. I think you'll read a story in the book that I lost my hearing totally. I lived deaf for a year. I hear with cochlear implants, which are a remarkable technology. If I take these devices off, I can't hear anything at all. And today I can participate in a Zoom meeting with a big audience. So I'm an optimistic technologist. I will admit that. I know there's unanticipated consequences, but I would rather make the anticipated consequences come true as soon as possible, like eliminate 90 to 95% of the roadway fatalities and enable poor people to gain access to jobs. In our city, Detroit, my home city, Detroit, in the poor neighborhoods, only 40% of the kids are graduating from high school. These people can't escape poverty because they can't get transportation. They can't get to the jobs. They can't get to the stores. They can't get to healthcare. So I just think we've got to go after these anticipated consequences, and when the unanticipated surface, let's manage them. Yeah. And hopefully we'll land in the right place. I don't think it's going to be perfect. I don't want people to walk away thinking it's utopia and everything will be perfectly, so it's not going to be that way. I see a lot of really good benefits to go after here.
Yeah.
What about the effect on urban mass transit? David would like to know that.
Yeah. I think there's a real important role for public transit, but not mass transit, except for some very special cities with special corridors that have high population density. Obviously, it works in Manhattan and in some of our other cities and other cities outside the world. But let's talk about public transportation. That bar chart that I showed that took us from $1.50 a mile down to 20 cents a mile, that was modeled for Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor has 120,000 cars owned in Ann Arbor. And we could get the same trips served in Ann Arbor that they were making with their cars with 18,000 shared two-person electric vehicles, these two-person electric pods. A transit bus has 64 seats, 32 rows, or 32 sets of seats, 16 rows, 2 on each side. So think about 32 of those vehicles having the capacity of a transit bus. Transit buses usually are only 10 to 15% full. So this is a much better form of public transportation. It's demand responsive, much more energy efficient, and much more affordable than we have with buses as we know them. So think public transportation reinvented because we have autonomous electric and these big digital connectivity systems, and not just not mass as the solution. And I think we're going to have a breakthrough in public transportation.
Priscilla is asking, what happens if your driverless car breaks down? What control would the passenger have? I've never heard of an electric item that never broke down at some point.
Yeah, well, every one of those cars is going to be carefully monitored by a control center to know that the car is in trouble. And there's going to be roadside service type systems. Engineers design these systems for what's called fail operational. So let's say you've got your digital map loaded a mile up the road, and you can't download the digital maps for the entire nation into your car. There's just not enough storage in your car because the maps have so much data. So you're interfacing with the satellite, And that's why we want at least about a mile up the road of data in case we lose our connection. We still have a mile's worth of data. And then if the system fails, we can get the person off the road safely. That's the whole idea of these safety systems. Hopefully we don't strand you. Today you get stranded with your car, but I think we're going to have a really, really impressive way to be monitoring what's going on out there and responding to it. And by the way, there's ways to download fixes to something that might go wrong. There may be ways to control that car from a command center to help it out of a difficult situation. A whole new form of roadside service, in fact, could evolve.
There's a number of people who have been asking about the insurance, who gets sued, what will the legal establishment do to this? Liability will be used to wreck you.
Yeah, well, a lot of lawyers are working on that. A lot of conferences are going on that subject. It's an interesting dilemma. Let me tell one little story that helped shape my thinking on it. And this is before autonomous, but let's say General Motors develops a new Corvette, and you own one. Lisa, you have a new Corvette, and your Corvette gets stolen. And the bad person who stole it drives through a 25-mile-an-hour neighborhood going 80 miles an hour and hits someone and kills them. And the family of the person that gets killed wants a compensation for that. So they first say, well, I'm going to sue the bad guy. The bad guy doesn't have any deep pockets to pay. Then they're going to say, oh, I'm going to sue Lisa. It was her Corvette. And you're going to say, no. Then they're going to say, I'm going to sue General Motors. Why is that? Because that Corvette knew where it was and knew the speed limit was 25, and General Motors allowed a car in a 25-mile-an-hour speed zone to go 80. Why didn't General Motors turn that car off and drop its speed to 25? So I think those are going to be some very interesting liability discussions. Is it the hardware that failed? Is it the software that failed? Was it the vehicle integration? And I think there's a lot of proven, they're called ISO standards for ways of developing these complex engineered systems that are going to find their ways into court to sort out these liability questions. I don't think you, the rider in the autonomous electric car, will be liable. I think it's going to be somebody in that broader system. The good news, though, is we think we're going to have 1/10, less than 1/10 as many of these crashes. And that's what we're striving for. So I would rather be in a world where we have 1/10 as many crashes that might be harder to sort out from a liability standpoint than 10 times as many crashes. And they always point the blame at you, the driver.
Somebody's asking, how do you think the Teamsters are going to reward you?
Well, I already know. I mean, they've already pushed back, and it's interesting that these big over-the-road trucks are regulated through a different mechanism than the car that you own and operate. And so, yes, this is one of these cases where we have to be inclusive. Truck driving is a very, very important job. It's an essential job, and we really have to appreciate and celebrate these people to enable all of us to have eaten during this pandemic, because they really kept the supply chains flowing, which is remarkable. There's a shortage of truck drivers, and it's not a job that everybody wants to have because a lot of them have to spend a lot of time away from home. And so I think if we work together and we enrich that job, that there's going to be a way to make that transition. But certainly to just dig in your heels and take sides right now is not the smart thing to be doing. I think we've got to do it with an inclusive mindset.
Louise is asking about current training programs for unemployed are not great. What do you actually think we're going to be doing with all of the unemployed truck drivers?
Well, I think we're going to have to, I really am a big proponent of 2-year colleges, whatever you call it in your state, junior colleges or whatever they're called, but the two-year educational programs that can retrain adults and stuff, I think are going to be absolutely essential. A lot of this has to do with a good communication between what are the jobs that are needed and what are the skills needed for those jobs. Believe me, at General Motors, we would oftentimes be frustrated where we would hire an engineer from a good engineering school, and then we needed to train them for a couple of years to do engineering. So we started donating our computer-aided design terminals as well as our software that we're using, so the students would learn on those so they came out ready to hit the street running so they could do the real engineering work. So I think the key really is in lifelong learning and the lifelong educational processes that are in place. And it's not always the big name colleges that matter here. I think it's a lot of the local community colleges that are going to be really, really important part of that future.
Well, that's good to know, because the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at BCC is affiliated with Berkshire Community College. And speaking of the Berkshires, somebody is asking about long distance high speed rail. Should we still be considering that? In the Berkshires, they say, this is Alice Roth, there's been discussion of creating a passenger rail link between the Berkshires and Boston. Is that going away?
Yeah. I certainly wouldn't be ruling it out. I've had the privilege of traveling all over the world. I've been in countries where they have high-speed rail systems, and they're absolutely remarkable. The question is they're very capital intensive, and you really need to have a lot of people movement along that corridor, and it has to work extremely well so that it's not heavily subsidized. I do think these autonomous systems, given our existing interstate system, a lot of times it's not the speed, it's not the top speed that matters. Think about the subway system. Next time you're, Lisa, because you live in Manhattan, next time you ride the subway, take a little stopwatch with you, and then start by saying, how long am I sitting, not moving while people are getting on and off? And then how long is the vehicle accelerating? How long did the subway go at top speed? And then how long did it decelerate? Then how long did it sit stop? And what you realize is if you doubled the top speed of the subway in New York, it's not going to cut your travel time much at all, because if you're running a public transportation system, a lot of your time is decelerating, stopping to pick up people, and reaccelerating. So I don't know that high speed is necessarily the answer. I think if you have continuous speed, like an autonomous vehicle running on the expressway overnight, and I don't really care whether it took an extra hour because I'm sleeping, hey, maybe we've got an answer there. So I'd be really careful. I know there's debate about the Hyperloop and the tunnels and stuff like that. People have to understand transportation isn't about speed alone, it's about throughput. So why do our expressways have so many lanes of width? It's capacity, it's the diameter of the pipe, not just how fast the fluid's moving through the pipe. So you have to understand that to begin to understand high-speed rail systems and hyperloops and others and the role they're going to play going forward. That's why I'm such a fan of these small, independent, autonomous pods that aren't tied to a physical infrastructure, because they have huge flexibility that they offer.
And speaking of infrastructure, B. Maxwell is asking, are there any things that cities should start working on today to become more friendly to autonomous vehicles?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, in a lot of cities, the second biggest source of revenue is parking fees. And if we're going to have shared fleets of autonomous vehicles serving people, they're not parking, they're moving to the next person to pick them up and move them. So we're going to have to start thinking about alternative forms of revenue. Now, this is an unpopular term. It's called roadway pricing, but the cities own those roadways. And if I'm going to have an Amazon package delivered to me with an autonomous vehicle that went on the city's roadway, how is that different than the city charging for parking? When I occupy a differential space of roadway for an instance of time, I'm parked in that differential space of roadway for an instance of time. It's like street side parking, but it's in itty bitty bits and microseconds. So I think cities are going to have to find a way to charge for the use of the public roads and use that for the benefit of the city. So I think that's one thing. I think becoming digital cities, really having good data, and that's going to be really, really key to not just the transportation systems of cities of the future, but the energy systems, the water systems, the security systems. So I think this infrastructure question becomes one of data infrastructure. It's going to be every bit as important as the physical infrastructure that's out there.
Enid Michaelman asks, autonomous aircraft?
Yeah. You know, I've never been a big fan of flying cars. I always felt that would be a bad car and a bad plane. So when we talk about flying cars, I think what comes to my mind now are these drones that aren't really cars. I think when you fly with one of these human drones and then you get to your destination, there's going to be plenty of ways to get you your last mile from where you touched down. You don't have to have an engine and wheels and have the wings fold in and everything and then drive that exact same vehicle to your destination. So don't get trapped into having a car that flies or a plane that drives on the ground. But human flight and packages, drone delivered packages are right now kinds of things. And they're going to be a very big part of this. But keep in mind, I shared a fact in my talk. 70% of the trips in America are less than 8 miles. I'm not convinced we need to go up in the air as people to travel those 8 miles. I think the 70% of those trips are 8 miles or 15 to 20 minute trips. We probably aren't going to need to go in the air. So I'm predicting that, yes, we're going to be, a lot more of us are going to be flying alone because of the control systems and the propulsion systems to do that. But I think it's going to be a segment of transportation. I don't think it's going to be the only way we move around. I think it's going to fill an important niche.
Harriet is asking when, where, and how can people sign up to try these cars?
To drive the cars, yeah. Well, unfortunately, it maybe depends a bit on which community you live in. So if you lived in Chandler, Arizona, you would be having an opportunity to raise your hand as an early rider and perhaps get selected to be part of the learning that's going on. I know companies like Aurora and Argo are doing a lot of development work in the Pittsburgh area. There's Austin, Texas has a lot of work going on in the Ann Arbor, Michigan area. So I think unfortunately, it depends as much on where you live. Otherwise, you're probably going to have to travel. And the sad thing is, these companies are busy doing their development work. They really can't afford to just take people for rides right now. They'll have their marketing programs and occasionally do demonstrations, but it's an all-out race to learn as much as you can every day with the fleet of cars that you have on the road.
Kathleen Kraft is asking, what is going to happen to the driver cars already in existence?
Well, this is great. I mean, there's in the United States about 240 million human-driven cars that are already in existence, and it takes about 15 to 20 years to turn over that fleet. So as the new vehicles begin to enter in, those cars are still going to be around. No one is going to tell people they can't drive. I should have made that message earlier. Please don't think I'm advocating that you won't be able to drive or you shouldn't be able to drive. Hey, if you want to drive and spend your time tethered to that steering wheel, if you want to spend your time pulling into a gas station and buying gas, if you want to spend your time looking for a place to park and walking in the rain from where you park to your ultimate destination, that's fine. And I fully understand that there's days when my wife has an Audi TT convertible. There's days where we just love putting that top down and driving in Michigan autumn rural areas and enjoying that. I get that fully. So no one's going to tell you you can't drive. But nobody told people they couldn't ride horses when the horseless carriage came along. And we still have horse racing. We still have equestrian. People still have horses as a hobby. And so I think there's going to be human-driven cars around for a long time. There's going to be combustion cars around for a long time. I think what we have to ask in both cases is that those pay the price of their externalities. If human drivers are less safe than the autonomous system, they're going to have to cover the cost of that externality in some kind of a pricing system. And if combustion vehicles are causing climate change and air pollution and geopolitical events, we got to cover that cost in the cost of the gasoline. We can't continue to subsidize it in those ways. So I think there's ways to solve these problems.
And this, I'm going to have this be the final question. It's another great question from Will. He says, what is the best way to prevent premature judgment? People I've talked to seem skeptical of a computer in the driver's seat, but he then says, I've read that elevators had the same problem when they became automated.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a magic answer other than doing the kind of thing we're doing tonight, which was so thoughtful of Art to reach out to me, New Lisa and Art to reach out to me and get this arranged. I appreciate that very much because I think the more people who read Autonomy and can begin to think about what might be possible here, the more we have a chance of not having people reach premature judgment. But it's all about these tipping points. At some point in time, it all tips. And I'll be honest, I resisted email for a long time. And suddenly I learned how to use it. This was a long time ago, obviously. And now I can't imagine living my life without it. So that's just human nature. And I think we're going to work through these things.
Well, thank you so much. Anne is asking, will this program be archived anywhere for people to see? And yes, if you've signed up for this program, this is being recorded. It will be turned into a YouTube presentation, and everybody who signed up with their email would get an email link to that. I want to remind people to go out and buy your book, Autonomy. It's available in hardcover, paperback, ebook, audiobook. You can go to hc.com and type in Autonomy, and it will give you every retailer. We are retailer agnostic. You can buy it directly from HarperCollins, Amazon, independent bookstore, wherever. And I just also want to remind people that coming up on the 30th is a conversation about this book, We Are Better Than This, which was written for the most part by Representative Elijah Cummings, Baltimore native son of sharecroppers. Unfortunately, he passed away in October before the book was complete. And his widow, Maya Rockymore Cummings, is an amazing woman. She will be talking about this book, talking about Elijah's legacy. Elijah was amazing. We have a forward from Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and we have lots of really exciting programming still to come. So just want to thank everyone. Please join OLLI. Now that we are all virtual, you don't have to live in the Berkshires to study in the Berkshires. So, and this course, of course, is ongoing.
That's nice.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Larry. And thank you, Pat. What a fascinating conversation. And as Lisa said, we'll have it recorded and shared. Have a great night or afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan and Pat. Bye, Larry.
Thank you, Lisa.